A 3-year-old girl kept signaling for help, but no one noticed, except for a former soldier. What did she do that caught his eye? A few minutes later, he stood up, and what he did next left everyone speechless. A fly was trapped against the glass pane, buzzing faintly, over and over, as if knocking on a world it could never reach. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty window, revealing streaks from a half-hearted cleaning. Outside, the Kansas highway stretched like a faint pencil line across the land, quiet and still, disturbed only now and then by a passing semi, whose engine roar faded quickly behind a stand of elms, turning gold with the season. Ethan Walker set his duffel bag down on the worn, leather-covered bench, which had sagged with age. He sat upright, as if his body hadn't yet relearned how to lean back naturally after years of rigid discipline. Even without the uniform, the straight spine and watchful eyes stayed with him, marks of a Marine who had served 18 years, twice deployed straight into combat zones. At the counter, Margaret Chen, a woman of Asian descent in her early 40s, her wavy hair pinned loosely, apron faded from years of use, was carefully wiping down the coffee machine's glass surface. No one in the diner spoke. The silence was deep enough to catch the clatter of the old HVAC unit, rattling and groaning as it strained to keep the warmth inside the aging wooden room. Ethan wasn't hungry, but he ordered a ham sandwich and a cup of black coffee anyway. The way he said, "thank you," was barely above a whisper, like if he said it any louder, the past might hear and come back to remind him this wasn't a world where simple things belonged. Kansas had been home once, before his parents were taken in a crash on Highway 54, a slick winter morning that left a 17-year-old boy with a suitcase and an empty house. He left town a week after the funeral, enlisted with just one thought in his head: staying would drive him crazy. People say time heals, but soldiers don't think like that. They just learn how to keep a wound quiet long enough to keep moving. At the table by the window, an elderly couple was having a late lunch. The man, black, with a silver beard, read the paper. The woman, wearing large reading glasses, mouthed softly to herself as she dipped a piece of bread into her soup. Nearby, a little boy, about 4, named Leo, judging by how Margaret called to him, ran loops around the chairs, clutching a small plastic toy car. Every time he let out a loud vroom, the old woman just shook her head and smiled with her lips closed, saying nothing. Ethan watched them. He wasn't the kind to let anyone slip past his line of sight, not out of suspicion, just habit. A deep one that let him read the world through the tiniest details. And then, he saw her. What was she doing that no one else noticed? In the corner, near the glass, behind a dry, brittle cactus in a pot, sat a little girl, 3, maybe 4 years old, dark skin, curly hair, wearing a pale blue dress. She sat very still, as if glued to the seat, hands resting on her thighs. Her gaze didn't land on anyone directly. It drifted across the room, brushing every face just long enough to see, but not long enough to be noticed. But she was looking for something, for someone who could read what she couldn't say. Across from her sat a man, tall, wearing a gray suit, blonde hair neatly trimmed, eyes pale blue, almost clear. He was reading a thick book with no visible title. He hadn't touched the child, hadn't spoken a word. All he did was read. And that was what caught Ethan's attention. Nobody takes a 3-year-old out to eat and then buries their nose in a book. Nobody drives down an interstate and just sits there beside a child like she's carry-on luggage. Ethan turned his coffee cup slowly, his index finger tracing the rim's warmth. He didn't look at the girl again, he didn't need to. He knew, in just a few more seconds, she would glance his way again. And she did, almost as if on cue, the same motion, only this time her eyes lingered, and in them, a slight tremble, just for a moment. From the kitchen, Margaret came out carrying a tray. She set the sandwich in front of him and asked gently, "Need any sugar, hon?" Ethan looked at her. A simple question, but her eyes squinted just a little, like she, too, sensed something wasn't quite right in the air of the diner. Ethan shook his head and gave a faint smile. Leo ran past again, nearly bumping into the little girl's chair. She flinched, no sound. The man across from her glanced up, just once, but it was enough to stop Leo in his tracks. Ethan turned to look outside. The parking lot was mostly empty. A dark gray SUV was parked near the utility pole by the road, no one inside, but the engine was running. There was a superhero sticker on the rear window, but not the kind kids put up, the kind used to block the view. He stood, walked his coffee cup over to the sink behind the counter, where Margaret was setting out a tray of apple pie. She looked at him. He spoke low, "That little girl in the corner, you noticed anything?" Margaret glanced over quickly. Years of raising 3 kids flickered behind her eyes. "She's been sitting there a while, hasn't said a word. I haven't seen her eat, but once or twice, I think she was crying quietly. I couldn't tell why." Ethan nodded. He walked back to his table and sat, this time facing her more directly. And then, the girl looked at him, this time directly. Her right hand lifted slowly. She curled it into a fist, then opened it, once, twice, 3 times. Not dramatic, but not hidden either. A signal. The universal one. SOS in silent form. He knew, and he believed her. No more doubt. When his gaze locked with the little girl's, young Leo accidentally dropped his toy car, which rolled to a stop at the foot of the man in the gray suit, standing next to her. Cole, the man, looked up, not at Ethan, not at Leo, but at the girl. His eyes were cold. He said nothing, didn't raise his voice. Just one look, sharp and still, was enough to make the girl pull her hand back and hurriedly place it in her lap. Ethan pressed his fingernails hard into his palm until it turned white. Late afternoon in Kansas was starting to turn chilly, but inside, the air was quietly beginning to boil. The girl had given a signal, and the old soldier knew then, he couldn't walk away from this place like some passing traveler anymore. Margaret's diner flicked on its yellow lights, just as the last rays of sunlight slipped through the cracks in the shutters. Outside, it wasn't fully dark yet, but the dimming light was enough to draw a line between inside and out, between the cozy little diner and the silent world beyond the glass. Ethan hadn't touched his coffee a second time. He sat still, watching, breaking down every detail like he was on a front line. Cole sat upright, eyes fixed on his phone. His face gave nothing away. He didn't speak, didn't wipe the girl's mouth, didn't bend down to say something kind or coaxing. A stranger sitting next to a lost child might have looked more involved than he did. Lily wasn't eating. Her hands rested in her lap, her eyes on Ethan. She didn't blink for a long time. She didn't look at Cole. The stiffness in her body didn't come from fatigue, it came from fear. Fear of being seen. Ethan took a small sip of his coffee, holding the cup but not lifting it all the way. Questions drifted through his mind, not one of them fully formed, but the feeling was unmistakable, that man wasn't the girl's father. He stood up and walked over to the table, still calm on the outside, each step steady, neither rushed nor slow. "Excuse me, hope I'm not interrupting." Cole looked up, his lips curved into a smile, but his eyes stayed cold. "What do you want?" "I was just wondering, is the girl your niece?" A brief hesitation. "She's my daughter." "Is there a problem?" No, just, she reminds me of my little cousin when she was a kid. Thought she was real sweet and got curious, that's all." Cole gave a faint smile and nodded, but the gesture was too perfect, like it had been programmed to seem friendly. Lily glanced briefly at Ethan. Her hand moved slightly, palm tightening into a fist, then releasing, once, twice, 3 times. This time, it was slow, deliberate, no room for doubt. Ethan feigned a pause, as if something had just come to mind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small peppermint candy, placing it on the table. "My niece used to love these. Wonder if the little one might, too. How about giving her a candy?" he added. "Strawberry. Kids usually go for that." He extended his hand toward Lily. The girl looked up, eyes flicking to Cole, then back to the candy. After a brief hesitation, she slowly reached out, her tiny fingers trembling as they touched the edge of the candy. The swat came quick, like a slap. Cole didn't say a word. He swept his hand across the table, striking Lily's wrist, not hard enough to make a loud sound, but just enough force to make that little arm recoil as if burned. She's allergic. Don't give her anything without asking. His voice was sharp. He stood up straight, put the candy back in his shirt pocket, and looked at Lily, slowly, deliberately. She didn't cry, but her hands pulled back, curling around the hem of her shirt, gripping tight, an unconscious defensive reflex. Her small shoulders quivered, her eyes lowered, not just in fear, but from a trust that had just cracked. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Cole gave a slight nod, like slamming a door shut. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a firm, silent signal the conversation was over. Ethan turned and walked back to his table, his back straight, but each step seemed heavier than the last. The air in the diner, already quiet, had turned thick, as if someone had dimmed a layer of light. The faint clink of a spoon against a glass, the breeze slipping through the door crack, everything was swallowed by a dreadful silence. Margaret looked over from behind the counter, her brow furrowed, one hand holding a towel-wrapped glass, the other pressed flat against the counter, as if trying to steady herself. Ethan sat down, let out a quiet breath, then spoke loud enough for Margaret to hear, "Call the police. The sooner, the better." Margaret froze for a moment, then gave a small nod. In the corner of the diner, Lily still sat upright, not leaning against the chair, as if she was afraid that if she let herself rest on anything, she might not be able to get back up. The coffee in the cup had gone cold. Ethan didn't drink anymore. He stood up again, walking with steady steps towards the back of the bar, where the light from the ceiling fixture caught the fine layer of dust on the glass surface. Margaret was standing there, motionless. She held an old cloth, its frayed edges coming loose, and slowly wiped a clean glass. The motion was repetitive, but her eyes were fixed on the empty space in front of her, as if trying to convince herself that she was still in control of the bar, still in control of her life. Ethan approached, unhurried. When he was just a step away from the counter, he stopped and placed both hands on the hardwood. He didn't knock, didn't make a sound, he simply rested his hands there, like someone placing a hand on a door before opening it with words. He bowed his head slightly, voice low. "I've confirmed it." The girl signaled again. It wasn't a mistake. Margaret turned toward him, her eyes heavy. She looked at him for a few seconds, unblinking, not asking anything right away, as if reading something in the expression of the old soldier. "You're sure?" she asked, her voice raspy but without hesitation. Ethan nodded, eyes steady on her face. "I'm a Marine. I've seen combat." That was a distress signal used when a victim can't speak. Short, clear, 3 times, just like the manual says. Margaret turned her head toward Cole's table. Lily was still sitting there, unmoving, like a piece of furniture set in the wrong place. She watched for a few more seconds, then turned back, speaking very slowly. "If I call the police and I'm wrong, can I be sued?" "Possibly. But if you don't call, and I'm right, a child might be taken out of the U.S. tonight." Margaret let out a sigh. The hesitation in her eyes was gone. She nodded, a small nod, but a heavy one, a nod she would never forget. "Follow me." She led Ethan behind the counter, slipping through the wooden door into the back, where the cold storage and break room were. The space was narrow, damp, but soundproof enough that no one outside could hear a thing. Margaret took out her phone and dialed a number. The screen lit up with the words, "Rachel Monroe, Sheriff." Lifting the phone to her ear, she spoke quickly. "Rachel, it's me, Margaret, cafe at rest stop number 8. I've got an emergency." The woman on the other end didn't sound alarmed, just asked briefly, "Is anyone hurt?" "Not yet, but there's a little girl, about 3 years old. She's with a strange man, not eating, not talking, no touch." Margaret glanced at Ethan. Someone here confirms she's signaling for help. There was a pause on the other end, then Rachel asked, who confirms it? Ethan raised his hand, and Margaret passed the phone to him. He put it to his ear. My name's Ethan Walker, former Marine. I can provide my military ID number later. I'm trained to identify nonverbal SOS signals. The girl has signaled twice, very clearly. The man hasn't been violent, but he's in complete control. Rachel's voice changed, focused now, no trace of doubt. I need the location and a description. Do you have a license plate? Gray SUV parked out front, rear window has a sun shade with a superhero sticker, Kansas plates, but I didn't catch the full number. The man's white, blonde hair, gray suit. The girl, light brown skin, pale blue dress, around 3 years old, curly hair. Rachel replied, I'm sending units now. Don't let them leave. I'll handle the rest. Click. The call ended. Margaret leaned back against the stainless steel shelf, her back trembled slightly. I didn't think I'd be doing this today. Neither did I, but I'm glad you did. At the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, the desk phone rang. Officer Tommy Reyes had just set a cup of instant noodles on the table when he reached for the receiver. Briggs speaking. We've got an emergency report from rest stop number 8, possible child abduction. Chief Collins wants you with the rapid response team. Another false alarm, huh? That's the third one this week. The witness is a former Marine, specially trained. This isn't one of those, I heard a strange cry, situations. Go, Tommy. Tommy shrugged on his jacket, muttering, let's just hope it's not another one of those nosy old folks who can't mind their own business. He slid his gun into the holster, checked his flashlight, then got into the patrol car. The red strobe lights flicked on. Back at Margaret's diner, Ethan and Margaret stepped out of the break room. No one in the diner had any idea what had just happened. No one noticed that the world had shifted, just a little. Cole was still sitting there, but his eyes had slid toward the counter. He was clearly more alert. The way he flicked his gaze without turning his head, sweeping the room with just his eyes, was the kind of tell only someone expecting to be followed would show. Lily was still sitting upright, but from behind the counter, Ethan noticed her glancing out the front window, like she was waiting for something to happen. Margaret's cafe, around 8 in the evening, there weren't many customers left. A draft slipped in through the narrow gap at the bottom of the glass door, carrying a chill that made the curtains flutter now and then, like a weary breath. The warm yellow light from the ceiling spilled over the dark wooden tables, casting patches of light and shadow across the floor, like the set of a silent play. Ethan was still sitting there, hands resting on the table, his coffee long gone cold. Every sense in his body was drawn taut, like a bowstring. Lily sat at the opposite table, hands pulled close into her lap, her eyes flicking toward him every so often. Cole remained the same, controlled, rigid, cold. The sound of the door latch clicked. It wasn't loud, but in the hush of that moment, it sliced through the air like a blade across still water. As the door cracked open, Cole shot to his feet, shoving the chair back abruptly. He grabbed Lily's wrist with enough force to leave the child's skin tinged red. Let's go, he said quietly, just above a whisper, but there was nothing polite left in his voice. The words came out like an order. Lily gave a slight jerk, her small feet moving reluctantly. She didn't scream, didn't struggle, but her face showed pure alarm. She looked back, her eyes sweeping across the table where Ethan sat, that same pleading look she'd given before, only now it was sharper, more urgent. Ethan placed a hand on the table, slid the coffee cup aside, and stood, not in a rush, not drawing attention, but every step had purpose, moving directly to block the path from Cole's table to the door. The space between them was barely 10 feet. The two men faced each other, the overhead light casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Neither spoke right away, they didn't need to. The air between them was pulled so tight, it felt like it might snap. Where do you think you're taking her? Ethan asked. His voice was low, steady, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Cole raised an eyebrow slightly, lips curling into a strained smile. I told you, we're heading back to Iowa. It's late. You're not planning on getting in my way, are you? Lily lowered her head, but her eyes stayed fixed on Ethan, her small hands clenched the hem of her shirt, trembling with each beat. Ethan didn't move. She doesn't want to go with you, he said. I've called the police. They'll be here soon. If you leave now, it'll look suspicious. Things will go worse for you. Cole let out a short, scornful laugh, shaking his head slightly, like he was listening to something absurd. Over a piece of candy? A glance? Who do you think you are, butting into someone else's business? I'm not sure who I am, Ethan replied, but I know she didn't go with you willingly. She gave a distress signal, twice. I saw it. I've been trained to recognize those signs. Cole frowned. He shifted his stance and pulled Lily closer, his grip tightening, making her let out a faint whimper. You're accusing me in public. I could sue you for interference with personal liberty. Ethan stepped forward, just half a step. It wasn't a threat, but it blocked the way completely. The police will sort that out. Until they arrive, I'm not letting you leave with her. Cole's eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, he thrust his arm out, as if to shove Ethan aside. But Ethan had been in combat, his reflexes were sharp, steady. He didn't back off or block, just angled his body slightly, maintaining his stance. Step aside, Cole growled, his eyes now bloodshot, breath turning ragged. Ethan said nothing, but his gaze held steady, quiet, cold as tempered steel. Cole was losing patience. He yanked Lily toward the door, but she resisted, bracing her feet against the floor. He jerked her again, rougher. This time, for a split second, his other hand drew back, as if ready to strike. But Ethan caught his wrist in midair, gripping it firmly. That's enough. Ethan's voice was low but carried weight. Cole struggled, trying to pull free. The two men stood nearly chest to chest, breath mingling, tension wound tight like a coiled spring. Cole made another attempt to shove Ethan, but Ethan didn't budge, feet planted like bedrock. Lily backed away, shaking, her hands clutched the hem of her coat, eyes wide open. You'll regret this, Cole hissed, his voice low, like a curse, the tendons in his wrist standing out beneath pale skin. Ethan still said nothing. He looked Cole straight in the eye, unwavering, then bent slightly, his gaze softening as he turned to Lily. You don't have to go anywhere. You're safe here. Lily didn't move, perfectly still, as if waiting for something to end, the way she hadn't dared hope it would. No one had time to say anything more. A siren wailed in the distance. Headlights flickered across the floor through the front window, blue, red, blue, red. A police SUV rolled to a stop just outside the cafe. The lights slowed, the engine cut off. A car door opened. Tommy Briggs stepped out first, his coat unbuttoned, one hand resting casually on the holster at his side. He didn't draw his weapon, but every step he took was measured. Behind him came Rachel Monroe, the police chief, calm, composed, commanding. She scanned the scene through the glass, where Ethan and Cole still stood like two pillars, rooted deep in the floor. Cole yanked Lily's hand, trying to turn and pull her away faster, but he had barely pivoted halfway when Ethan took another step forward, planting himself squarely in front of the door. He didn't tense up, didn't say a word, but his broad soldier's back stood like a wall. Stop right there, Rachel signaled with a hand, her voice clear, not loud, but firm. Tommy stepped in closer, his hand extended in a gesture of peace. We just need a few minutes. Don't make this more complicated than it has to be. Cole hesitated. He turned to Ethan, eyes burning with fury, his lips moving just enough to mouth, "You're going to regret this." Ethan said nothing. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, his eyes meeting Lily's. He gave her a small nod, slow, silent, like a promise. Lily didn't say anything, but she let go of Cole's sleeve and stepped back, just one step, but enough for everyone to see. Tommy bent down, whispered something gently to Lily, then held out his hand. She stared at it for a few seconds, then took it. She didn't cry, but in her eyes was a light, faint but unmistakable, the kind only survivors carry. Trust, even if fragile. Cole was separated from the girl and taken outside. Rachel kept her eyes on him until he disappeared behind the car door. Inside, Margaret's diner had gone completely still. Ethan walked back to the table and sat down, his whole body seemed to loosen, like a man coming off a chase no one had run. Margaret stepped out from behind the counter. She set a glass of water in front of him. "I never thought I'd do something like that, but today seems like a day to do the right thing." Ethan took the glass, looking at the soft mist clinging to the rim. He didn't drink, just laid his hand flat on the table, as if confirming that a new chapter had just begun. The thing is, doing the right thing doesn't always come at the right time. Margaret let out a long breath. She sat down on the stool behind the counter and looked out the front window, where the red and blue lights of the police cruiser still flickered across the wet asphalt. But today, at least, we didn't lose the trail. Outside, the wind kept blowing, but this time, it didn't feel quite so cold. The late-day breeze swept across the parking lot, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and the familiar tang of old gasoline. Overhead, wispy clouds, thin as smoke, drifted quietly behind the line of trees along the highway. The police had turned off their lights. Cole was led to cruiser number 40, 2 hands cuffed, head lowered. He didn't resist, didn't shout. He just quietly turned his head toward his SUV, as if trying to memorize the direction he never got the chance to run. Tommy glanced at his phone, his eyes flickered when he saw an urgent alert from federal headquarters. 2 men from Cole's group were stopped at the southern border. Texas police confirmed they were waiting for Cole, possible accomplices. All 3 are suspected of being involved in a child trafficking ring. Rachel gave a slight nod, her hand tightening around the case file. Ethan stood on the other side of the car. No one called to him, but everyone was looking at him. A few bystanders still lingered near the cafe, whispering among themselves. Some took photos, others looked surprised, even moved. A young woman with dyed purple hair, holding her phone like a weapon, was live-streaming on TikTok from her car, camera pointed at the police, speaking with excitement in her voice. "See, told you, that man is clearly not her dad. This is a broad daylight kidnapping in Wichita. Follow me for updates." But not everyone was chasing the story. A middle-aged woman in business attire, a document bag in hand, walked up to Rachel. "I was sitting at the back table. I saw everything. That man didn't act like the girl's father at all. He pulled her like she was a sack of goods, and she pulled back. That's not how a child acts with family." Rachel nodded, her gaze heavy but resolute. She signaled to Tommy to take the statement. Lily sat quietly on the back seat of the police car, the door still ajar. A small, cream-colored jacket had been draped over her shoulders by one of the officers, oversized and swallowing most of her little frame. She stared out through the window. Then the door swung open. No one motioned to her, no one called her name, but Lily stepped out. She walked slowly, each small step across the rough concrete seeming guided only by instinct, drawn toward the one person she believed had kept her alive. Ethan didn't move. He didn't open his arms. He only tilted his head slightly when she stopped in front of him. Lily looked up at him, eyes unblinking. "You're my hero," her voice was soft,